Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we're going to take a look at the CRKT Vissle. This is a Jasper Voxnes design and it's new for this year. It's been out for a while. It came out near the beginning of the year and I just haven't got around to sharing it with you guys. I've actually had it for some time. I've been able to play with it quite a bit. You've maybe seen it on Instagram a couple times if you follow me over there. And I've been pretty impressed with it. So I've got a chance here. There's a couple other videos I want to make, but I'm going to take a minute and get this review out for you so that if there's some of you wondering about this knife, you'll have at least a little bit to go on in terms of my thoughts. All right, so let's start off with size and weight. This is what we normally do. 8 inches overall. Okay, so 8 inches overall. 3 3/8 inches on the blade. So a little shorter than I like, but certainly doable, right? It's not anything I would complain about. 4 5/8 on the handle, and that's definitely big enough that I can get, a decent grip on the knife. It's quite slim at just about 3/8 of an inch, and it's under an inch, about 7/8 of an inch in this dimension. So one of the benefits I would say of this knife is that it's pretty slim and small in pocket, and so if you're wanting something that doesn't take up a lot of space, I think this is a good option. The weight on this guy is going to be one issue that for its size is a little high. So the weight on this guy is going to be 4.6 ounces. Now that's not crazy heavy, but remember, this knife, if you look at the blade stock, it's fairly thick. If you look at the liner, at the handle, it's full stainless steel without any kind of milling. So it kind of stands to reason that this knife is going to be a little hefty. But that's kind of the trade-off you make, right? When you make a knife out of stainless steel, you get a pretty durable knife and you get a pretty budget-friendly knife, but it's going to be a little heavier. So you're going to have to, the trade-offs have to come somewhere. In terms of the blade steel here, oh, by the way, I guess I should say this carries like a dream, as you can well imagine, being this slim and only 4.6 ounces, which again, for a stainless steel frame lock is not bad. It carries really, really comfortably. Now we'll move on to the blade. Blade on this guy is 8CR13 MOV. Now, I'm not a huge fan of 8CR13 MOV, but let me say this. I've actually carried this knife and used it a fair bit, and I have not done anything but a light strop on this, and it's very sharp. Okay, so the first thing is, 8CR13 MOV responds really well to any kind of sharpening. Okay, so it strops up really easily. The other point that I'm making there, which is maybe the more important point, is that for the average person, and I would consider myself a pretty average knife user, and maybe a little bit above average, because I'll often use a folder, because I've always got one in my pocket, I'll often use a folder where other people would maybe use a kitchen knife or a box cutter or something else. But I would say, for a knife guy, I'm a pretty average user, and this knife has held up quite well, okay? And my point there is, when it comes to steel, it's not actually that big of a deal. Even some pretty crappy steel is gonna serve most of us fine, because, we're gonna make, 5 cuts in the average day, and even a pretty crappy steel is gonna make those 5 cuts just fine, and then we can touch it up on a strop when we get home. So, while I'm not a huge fan of 8CR13 MOV, there are lots of steels I like better. I still can't really, it's hard to take points away when it pretty much does what I need my folding knife to do. All right, so let's move on from that. I wanted to say that extra little bit about the steel because it's one of those things where, I will... And I'm guilty of it too, guys. When I get a knife in S35 VN or M390 or 20CV or something, I love it, and I'll praise the steel, talk about how awesome it is and how great it is that that knife has this steel that takes an edge and holds it forever and ever and ever. And I do it like that, all right? But I don't say that to tell you that, boy, you should never buy a knife with budget steel, because the reality is for most of us, that budget steel is going to be more than adequate. All right, moving on. This has a hollow grind, which I do really like. Let's get the blade up here so you can take a little closer look. This has a hollow grind, and I'm a huge fan of hollow grinds. Makes knives really thin behind the edge, and it allows that thinness to go up a little higher. So even, if you start measuring this with a set of calipers, it stays thin, 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 and then finally starts thickening up around here. Now it does get a little thick at the back spine. This could have been a little thinner blade stock. And you'll notice if you're slicing up a bunch of apples or something, sometimes it'll do fine, I'd say 80% of the time, and then the odd time I'd go to cut something with this, and I would notice the thickness on that blade and be like, yeah, this could have been a little thinner. However, okay, I'm actually a fan of thicker blades. Don't ask me why. I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I just like they just feel more substantial to me. Now, you know, you can argue with me in the comments if you want. In fact, I would invite you to do so. But for me, I'd prefer to have this a little thicker blade stock, and you know, maybe from time to time I run into an issue with slicing an apple or a tomato or something like that. Most of the time, as I say, it's been very, very good. Okay, so, and of course, the biggest problem is going to be down here. As you get more, you can see how there's more material back here that you're going to have to move through a material. So we're cutting with the further end of the blade. That's not such a thing. So nice and thin behind the edge, hollow grind. As I said, it's a bit thick. Now this blade is a little bit of a different shape. You can see you've got that very, very slight upswept tip there, which I don't mind in this knife. Sometimes an upswept tip can make a knife awkward when, you know, if you're holding the knife like this and the tip is like way up here by my finger, it can feel like, you know, what am I supposed to do with this? Okay. A lot of knives that have it will cant the blade down a little bit. So for example, the cold steel Tawar or the Espada, they try to accommodate the upsweep in the tip by changing the relationship with the handle and the blade. This one is not too bad, okay? I've actually, you know, you can see as I'm holding this that it's still, the tip is pretty much in line with the direction that I'm going to be able to apply force. So no big deal there. And in fact, it's kind of, you know, it makes this knife a little bit different than what we're used to seeing, which I do appreciate. In terms of utility on this blade, yeah, it's been quite good. And as I said, it held an edge fine. And the thin grind is something I really, really like. When it's nice and thin behind the edge because of that hollow grind, that gets me excited. So blade, I have no big issue with the blade other than the steel. And as I say, for 99.9% of knife users, HCR13 is absolutely fine. Let's talk about the action, because this is something that's pretty good. For a knife in this price point, you do have the IKBS system in here, and the action is quite nice. It flips out fast, it flips out pretty hard. It's fun to fiddle with and flip while you're watching TV or whatever. Now, one thing I will say is, I have trained myself to keep my fingers off the lock bar. This is a knife that, let me show you what happens. If I get my fingers on the lock bar, it'll still flip, but man, I've really got to put a lot of pressure on that flipper tab. And over time, when I first got the knife, I was like, man, this thing is hard on my finger. Really, all it was is I was pushing on the lock bar and making it really tough to deploy. So get your fingers off the lock bar and it works just fine. And that's a pretty common thing for stainless steel frame locks. And it's especially, you know, when you get a knife this thin, there's not as much room. You can see you've got to have your fingers way back here to flip it well. So that is a little issue where, yeah, the detent is pretty stiff if you have your fingers on the lock bar. The other issue I have with this action is that even though there's a bit of a cutout here, either it needed to be bigger or it needed to be, you know, they could have removed some material on this side. The lock bar can be a little hard to access. So when I'm, you know, actuating this knife or I'm opening and closing it, I really have to kind of dig my thumb into that fairly small space, and I would have appreciated it being just a little bit more room there. All right. Otherwise, though, the action is really nice. The lockup is really solid. And again, I'm going to make this point, guys. I've made it before, and I probably sound like a broken record, but rock solid lockup, okay, on a, what, $35 knife. Okay, so because knives like this exist, okay, I cannot forgive when a knife that costs $50 or $100 has blade play. There's no excuse. If you can make a knife without blade play for $30, then there's no way I'm going to forgive someone who can't do it for $50 or $100. All right, and I don't care what lock you're using. If you're using a lock that blade play is inherent to that lock, then it's a bad lock and get rid of it. Okay, moving on. Sorry about that. Now, that's my second digression. One about cheap steel and now one about blade play. But let's get back to the point here. Overall, the action is quite nice. It is on bearings, which for some of you, may be off-putting because you prefer a blade, phosphor bronze washers in here or something because, you're thinking of gunk getting in those bearings. I don't know. I've always talked about it and I've mentioned it in lots of videos, but I've never really had a problem with it that was anything worth worrying about. Finally, let's talk about the handle. Stainless steel frame lock, aluminum backspacer. You do have in here, let's see if I can show you. It's really going to be hard to see, but that screw, you can kind of see it more from the front here, right at the tip of my thumb. See that little block behind there? So that's an over travel stop, which is definitely a nice touch on this knife. And so, and then you've got, single position clip, and yeah, that backspacer, I'm going to call it aluminum. It's definitely metal, and aluminum is my best guess at this point. So what do I think of the construction of this? I really, really like it. I think CRKT, their sweet spot right now seems to be these stainless steel frame locks. They have a few of them that are really, really good. The Fossil was good. This knife is quite good. The Amicus in the stainless steel was really, really nice. The Buku is big and heavy, but still generally well done. And there's a few of them anyway. And you can, I'm going to forget the one. The Liang Ma design from this year is also stainless steel frame lock. CRKT has been doing a really good job with their stainless steel frame locks. And I think it's because they're just simple and straightforward. And anyway, so if you're going to look at a CRKT, you want something budget friendly that's still going to perform decently well, I would be looking at any one of their stainless steel frame lock knives. The Pilar is one I forgot to mention too, and that was a huge hit for this year, and rightly so, I believe. Stainless steel frame lock. The ergonomics on this are pretty good. You can see, it's a pretty straightforward handle. Couple little issues. It can be a bit slick at times. Now, what I mean by at times is depending on, the air or what I'm doing or if I'm wearing gloves or not, from time to time I pick up this knife and it's a little slick, especially if my hands are really, really dry. The other little issue I have with it is the back of the flipper tab here can be a bit of a hot spot if I really end up getting pushed up onto it really hard, which rarely happens, but I was doing some cutting and I was like, yeah, that is actually kind of sharp. So normally when I cut, I'm back here anyway, and you can see there's a little bit of space there, so it's not a problem. But from time to time, I did find myself kind of up here and getting a little bit of discomfort from that. Otherwise though, I think it's very comfortable in hand. The cutting task that I did with it, it did very, very well. It was comfortable. I didn't get a lot of fatigue, if you know what that means. Like you start to think, I've got to change my grip position because this is just uncomfortable. Didn't really happen with this knife. It was pretty nice. There is this divot here that can be kind of for indexing, possibly, or it could just be an addition to help get a little more traction on this knife. Your finger does kind of fall into it and it gives you just a little bit of something to grip onto. The clip does that as well. And that's pretty, on a slim knife, the clip often holds that function. By the way, the clip where it's placed is really nice. It does not interfere with my grip whatsoever. It is single position though, so that's gonna put off some of you lefties. I like the implementation of it. It's kind of understated and fits the knife really well. And it does go in and out of pocket quite nicely. They've got this ramp just perfect. It easily one-handed goes in and out of just about any pocket that I have tried to put it in. And so I've got to say I like that as well. So in terms of overall design, in terms of construction, in terms of ergonomics, I think the handle is fairly well done. It could do with just a little bit more traction, but otherwise no big complaints. Finally, let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. I've got a few different knives here. When you talk about budget knives, of course, you pretty much have to bring in a Rat Model 1. And in the Aussate version, the Rat 1 and this guy are going to be very similarly priced. And really, the only advantage, they're similar, well, the Vissle is going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit slimmer, probably carry a little bit nicer. Otherwise, though, they're going to be, fairly close competitors. Let's throw a pair of 2 in here, not because They're all similar, but because a lot of people are familiar with the size and the Para 2, and so it kind of gives you an idea of what you're dealing with for the overall size. Let's see, I don't have a lot of budget stuff around right now. There's the Kershaw Knockout. Again, a smaller knife, very slim in pocket, about double the price, okay? When we're talking about stainless steel frame locks, Boker has done a great job with the Lateralis, and again, about double the price, but you're getting a knife that is a little bit lighter, and the D2 is going to be a big upgrade in steel. All right, and so, and of course, by the way, this is purely, okay, this is purely subjective, but I like this design a little better, even though I do like both designs. What else have we got? Oh, I'm going to throw this guy in more as a representation. Sorry, there we go. One, it's a smaller knife, Osage steel, but Cold Steel has a couple of pretty nicely done, sort of smaller, budget-friendly backlocks that I think are, you know, good competitors for this if you're not a big fan of the stainless steel liner locks. So, what is my overall take on this knife, guys? I've actually been pretty impressed with it. From time to time it was a little slick, but certainly nothing that, you know, made me not want to use it. Carries really, really well. I do like the design. Yeah, I wish the steel was a little better, but not, you know, it is what it is. It's $35, and so you kind of expect to get that kind of steel. The other thing I would say is if you're looking at this, there are some real steel knives and there are some rake knives that you might want to consider, although they are going to cost you a little more. All right, there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this knife down below. What do you think of the design? And do you agree with me on my little rant about the steel and the and the lockup? All right, thanks for watching. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.